Namaste.
Namaste.
Not that that would be entertaining in its own way. A step ladder. So, impermanence. I'm taking this opportunity this fall to run through a number of Buddhist concepts and that are, I've been looking at the gospel reading for the week saying what equivalent Buddhist concept is in there. And then going after that. And some people, somebody once, go figure, put a negative comment up on our videos saying that I was trying to be a syncretist. And a syncretist is somebody who basically tries to make everything fit together and say that it's all equivalent. And my position really is more like saying that we're all walking up a mountain. We're on different sides of the mountain depending on the tradition we're in. And we all may not be headed to the same point, but we're headed to the same city. And while religious traditions differ in how they say you ought to get up the mountain, they address the same issues. So I'm not saying that the path up the mountain is the same in every religious tradition. I'm saying there are commonalities in terms of the issues that those traditions address, and if we get in touch with what those are, we'll understand each other better. And if we get in touch with what those issues are, it will be much less easy to be, in sort of a blanket way, critical of other traditions. In other words, and this is apt, given the news the last couple of days, once you start to understand that Eastern and Western traditions talk about the same things, even though the path may be different, and you should certainly understand that Christianity, Judaism, and Islam are all derived from the same root, and therefore are all three interrelated. Once you get to where you understand that about the Abrahamic traditions, and that all traditions talk about the same things, you really can't, in any kind of a common sense sort of way, say what was said to me at a wedding rehearsal last year: all Muslims are terrorists.
They sure are, according to Ben Carson.
Well, and this guy knew this because he was Jewish, which makes perfect sense to me. But it also says that if you start to factor in impermanence, impermanence basically means everything changes all the time. And that's been expressed a number of really cutesy and memorable ways. You can't put your foot in the same river twice. I don't walk around sticking my feet in rivers, but I guess some people apparently do. And we remember it when we're talking philosophically. But then if you start to factor in people who lived through the Great Depression, where all of a sudden everybody had to make whatever they had last. It just was the only way to make it through financially. And so all of a sudden, all the furniture was covered. You did your best to make sure nothing, and some of it never got uncovered.
Yeah, the plastic stuff.
Some of it's gone on for generations. You made your best. We couldn't go, obviously I had two sets of grandparents. We were much closer to my mother's parents, both geographically, they were 2 blocks away, and emotionally. And my dad's parents lived actually not far from here in Bayview when I was little. And but my Nana and Grandpa, who were my mom's parents, man, that furniture was covered. There were plastic runners over the carpet. It was like, But that was a product of living through the Depression and having had a house fire during the Depression. And so it was kind of the double whammy. And my mother inherited that, so, the minute the new stove, even if the new stove was now 3 years old, got its first scratch, the world came to an end. It is ruined. Not ruined, but ruined. I don't know if they were, telling the future or what. But, using the stove, and having, not lived through the Depression myself, even as a child, it was kind of, I didn't understand. And as I got older, I started to understand it was the Depression thing. But the truth is, no matter how long people lived, the appliances they had during the Great Depression were not the appliances they were still using in the 1960s. Sooner or later, those things broke too. And on a very key level, and especially today with planned obsolescence, everything breaks. Sooner or later, everything breaks. Sooner or later, you will either need to buy a new one or decide that you don't really need one, because whatever it is, the old one will have stopped working. And if it doesn't happen for you, you can leave it to your kids and it'll happen for them. Sooner or later it's just going to happen. And sometimes it's not an issue for us, and sometimes when it's our favorite, whatever it is, then it's a big issue. And Ajahn Chah, who was referred to in this first reading, had a cup that he drank water from that he really liked. And his disciples questioned him, aren't you becoming attached to the cup? And he said, not at all, because I picture it in my mind as already broken. Because I know one day it will be. And then when it breaks, I'm not going to be upset. We become attached to relationships. And I think we should be attached to some people that we're in relationship with. But the truth is that every relationship is going to end. You're either going to have that big fight, or one of you is going to die. And what that should cause us to do really is cherish those relationships more, not value them less. Impermanence doesn't say, what the heck. You were going to break up sooner or later anyway. The secret to not being disappointed is just not getting attached. Well, when it comes to the people we love, there is going to be a certain amount of attachment. Now, we hope that it's not, this kind of attachment where it's like we're strangling the life out of each other for fear that somebody's going to walk away. But it's going to happen. Every system of government, every country, sooner or later, either changes so radically it's hard to recognize or ceases to exist. My relatives are from Prussia. We could vacation there next year, but yeah, it does. But you can't find it on the map anymore. The British Empire at one point controlled a chunk of the world, as the Roman Empire did before it. Not anymore.
Yeah, try finding the Holy Roman Empire on a map.
That's right. You can't. Although some would argue that Vatican City counts.
I read yesterday that Portugal and Spain and Greece are in such big trouble financially that the whole European Union may break up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
That's Walker's doing, breaking up the unions.
Very good. Bit of a reach, but very good. And so if you're really attached, if your happiness depends on there being a Greece, if you really need those salads and those diners,
They're not going anywhere.
then you're going to suffer. And suffering is different from mourning the loss of something. Mourning the loss of something is appropriate. But never being happy again because it's gone is the result of attachment. And not being able to grieve and mourn effectively. The things that are happening in the world, the things that happened in Paris, are terrible things that in the middle of them seem like they'll never end. Seem like the world has changed irreparably. Seem like, I'm sure especially if you were there, or even not even where it happened, but in the city, it seems world-shattering. But in truth, things do continue on. And so impermanence doesn't say, get to a place where you just don't care. Impermanence says, get to a place where you won't be surprised when something changes. This was the crisis when Jesus and the disciples were at the temple. I was amazed when I went to Israel that if you look at, there were two temples, right? There was one that was built and then destroyed in the 6th century BCE. No. I have Jerry. I have more in my bag. That'll start you. The stones that were, the first temple was made of are probably about 12 feet long. You can tell how deep they are. They're probably about 5 feet tall. And I would assume they're at least as deep. And the ones that the second temple was built of were about half that size. But still massive stones. And you're thinking, once you remember there's no heavy equipment. We didn't just drive the semi-truck down there with the flatbed on the back and get the crane to pick up the stone, but rather they had logs. And they somehow got the stone up on a log and pushed it, put another log under, pushed it, put another log under. And when they got far enough down, one of the logs popped out the back. They ran around to the other side with the log. So you can imagine how, with the stories of how long it took to build this thing, and how massive these stones were, when Jesus said, not one stone will be left on another, the disciples were kind of like, right. This thing was built to last. And yet it was destroyed. And the way, interestingly, you destroy a building like that, because obviously you're not going to knock it down, and if you don't have cannon and things, and they didn't, is they built a big bonfire outside of it. They propped wood up against it, built outside, built a bonfire on it. The fire caused the water that was inside the stone to expand, and the stones eventually shattered. And that's how they got these massive structures to fall down without heavy weaponry. So not only was it inconceivable to them that the temple wouldn't fall because of its physical structure, but it was also the place where God lived, and how could that happen? And then the last few sentences are the Harold Camping sentences. If you remember, Harold a few years ago predicted the end of the earth, the end of the world, and I think it was March or May, and then that didn't happen, and he had previously predicted it in the 90s, and then he had got the math wrong, he said, and it was October or November that year it was going to end, and here we still sit. I was podcasting at the time and asked everybody who wouldn't be needing their money or the deeds to their property, because they were going to, be raptured, to send it to me. Nobody did. There will be earthquakes and famines. These are just the beginnings of the sufferings associated with the end. When you hear wars and reports of wars, don't be alarmed. It seems like there's something in us that hears something, and we want to, some people want to jump to this idea that this is the end of the world. And yet, how many wars have there been in human history? How many earthquakes have there been in human history? And that represents another way, strange as it seems, to not understand impermanence. Impermanence will tell you that wars happen all the time. Earthquakes happen all the time. The political situation changes all the time. So there's no need to panic. There's no need to scam people out of their, predict the end of the world so that people can be ready. Instead, we might look at how do we change our need to go to war all the time. We might look at how do we reduce the damage done by these storms that happen and these earthquakes that happen. But being surprised by them is really a waste of time and keeps us unsettled and imbalanced and worried about what's going to happen next. And it's a great way to avoid doing something constructive. So it's probably not possible to get to a place, and unless you get to full enlightenment, and I'm not convinced full enlightenment is possible. But for most of us, it's not that we'll never be surprised by something. It's not that we won't get caught and find ourselves saying, how in the world could this happen? But it's when we're in the middle of it and we find ourselves in that place, hopefully the little light bulb will go off and we'll say, oh wait though, there's impermanence. Everything changes. Even the most stable appearing structures and places in the world, like the temple, collapse. And so we should hold those things loosely, not let our happiness or make our happiness depend on them, but instead recognize that it's all a matter of flow. And 300 years from now, it won't matter to us anyway. Amen.
Amen. That's pretty good.